नमो तस्स भगवतो अरहतो सम्मा संबुद्धस्स। नमो तस्स भगवतो अरहतो सम्मा संबुद्धस्स। नमो तस्स भगवतो अरहतो सम्मा संबुद्धस्स. So, Jai Bhim and Namo Buddhaya to all of you. And today we are going to look at the eighth subsection of the part 3, the Buddhist way of life, and it's the book 4. So the eighth subsection is titled as on thoughtfulness and mindfulness. Now, these two words, I think in Pali, can be translated as apramad or appamad, and the sati, or to be alert, or being, mindful, being aware. And we often hear in Buddhism these two words, appamad and mindfulness, and sati. So I'm going to read, as we do in this particular part of the Buddha and his Dhamma. I'm going to read it through, and then I'm going to go through the verses and going to glance over some of the important things that we can find interesting. So let me begin reading the subsection 8, titled as on thoughtfulness and mindfulness. So this is the title of the subsection. So the verse number 1 goes like this: in everything be thoughtful, in everything be mindful, in all things be earnest and bold. This is the Buddhist way of life. All that we are is the result of what we have thought. It is founded on our thoughts. It is made up of your thoughts. If a man speaks or acts with an evil thought, pain follows him. If a man speaks or acts with a pure thought, happiness follows him. Therefore, pure thoughts are important. Verse number 4 goes like this: be not thoughtless, watch your thought. Draw yourself out of the evil way, like an elephant sunk in mud. Verse number 5, let the wise man guard his thoughts, for they are difficult to pursue, very artful, and they rush whenever they list. Thoughts well guarded bring happiness. As rain breaks through an ill-thatched house, passion will break through an unreflecting mind. As rain does not break through a well-thatched house, passion will not break through a well-reflecting mind. Verse number 8, this mind of mine went formerly wandering about as it liked, as it listed, as it pleased. But I thought, now hold it in thoroughly, as the elders who hold the hook holds the furious elephant. It is good to tame the mind. It is good to tame the mind, which is difficult to hold in and tightly. Rushing wherever it lists, a tamed mind brings happiness. Those who bridle their mind, which travel far, will be free from the bonds of temptation. If a man's faith is unsteady, if he does not know the true Dhamma, if his peace of mind is troubled, his knowledge will never be perfect. Whatever a hater may do to a hater, or an enemy to an enemy, a wrongly directed mind will do him greater mischief. Not a mother, not a father will do so much, nor any other relatives, as a well-directed mind will do us. Now, some of these verses we have already have seen, and these verses are very important. But as we have seen in the Buddha and Dhamma, the what Baba Ambedkar does is bring the disparate verses together, and he sort of structures them in a way that that we begin to see the full implications of those verses in a context in which Baba Ambedkar is reflecting on. And I think that is what is what we need to do. So you see, this thoughtfulness or mindfulness is a very important Buddhist teaching. It is one of the very important of the teachings of the Buddha, to be mindful and to be thoughtful. And there are many gradations of how to be thoughtful or how to be mindful. But without awakening or without being mindful, one cannot pursue the path of the Buddha. And to be thoughtful and to be mindful has been taught in the Buddhist canonical literature. In every teaching of the Buddha, this thoughtfulness, or what is called the mindfulness, is very important. And as some of you might be knowing, that the mindfulness itself has become a big word in the international and national and all sort of spheres. When people talk about the health, when people talk about how to cope up with suffering, when people talk about how to cope up with generate the strength of the mind, the most important path to pursue is the path of sati, or mindfulness. Now here we do not see what is called the traditional representation of the term mindfulness. But the meaning is very clear, that whatever we do, we have to watch our mind, we have to guard our mind, we have to bridle our mind, we have to control our mind. So the implication is very clear. So it's verse number, as the verse number one goes, what Baba Ambedkar is saying in terms of this particular section is, in everything be thoughtful. So whatever we do, whatever we whenever we speak, whenever we act, even whenever we thought, the key here is to be thoughtful. So it is not just that we are mindful in some areas, but in every area we have to be thoughtful, and in everything we have to be mindful. In all things be earnest and bold. Now these two words, I think, are very important when we think about Buddhism, because Buddhism is just considered to be the path of being slowed down, nothing is moving, no action, and so on and so forth. And therefore I think that's very interesting part of the teaching of the Buddha, to understand that we have to be earnest and we have to be bold. And in the last words of the Buddha are about being earnest and being bold. As if some of you can know, the last teachings of the Buddha is the word that comes in this particular section, appamada. So the Buddha says, when he was asked about his last words, appamadina sampadit, strive with diligence, earnestness. So being earnest, being bold, being working diligently is what the Buddhism is all about. Buddhism is not about losing ourselves in some idleness, not making efforts. Buddhism is all about making efforts. Buddhism is all about striving. Buddhism is all about going from the passivity to activity. So Buddhism is a path of, we can say, quote unquote, activism. It is not the path of as generally depicted, that everything is slowed down, everything appears in slow motion, or like that. It's not like that. Buddhism is a path of striving. Buddhism is a path of cultivation. Buddhism is a path of, what we can say, earnestness. Buddhism is a path of being bold. Buddhism is the path is a path of being active in the world, being active with yourself. So these verses, these sentences in the verse number 1, in everything be thoughtful, in everything be mindful, in all things be earnest and bold, this actually captures the spirit of the Buddha. This actually captures the spirit of the Buddhism. And therefore we have to be we have to keep this teaching of the Buddha in mind. And this is the Buddhist way of life. Now, how does one become thoughtful or mindful? It's when if we are trying to train our minds, if we are trying to train our body, if we are trying to train our speech. 3 kinds of training in Buddhism. We cannot train them if we are inactive. We cannot train them if we are not making efforts, if we are not striving hard, because it needs the Buddhism needs the striving, the great efforts that we need to put in. So in the verse number 2, as elsewhere we have seen, everywhere we have seen, Baba Ambedkar summarizes it, saying that this is the Buddhist way of life. And the verse number 3 is very clear. It's actually the first 2 verses of Dhammapada. And these 2 verses of Dhammapada are combined into one paragraph here by Baba Ambedkar. And it as we have seen, it shows that whatever we are, whoever we are, it is the result of what we have been thinking, how we have been cultivating our minds. It is about our minds, the way we cultivate our minds, the way, that is the way we become. And therefore, the thoughts are so important. What we think, what we visualize, what we imagine, what we, strive for to understand, it's all make us what we are. And what we are is also founded on our thoughts. It is made up of our thoughts. We cannot be separated from our thoughts. It's inseparable. So whatever our minds are, our minds and our behavior, our minds and our being, minds and who we are cannot be separated. And this verse number, this third verse goes on to, if a man speaks or acts with an evil thought, pain follows him. You see, it's the relationship between thoughts. So whatever we think, we become. And whatever we think, we become. And whatever we think, that is the basis of our action and speaking. So basically, the thoughts are the basis of our action and speaking, isn't it? So the mind is supreme. So, we might be very speaking very nicely, but in our minds, we might be thinking differently. In our minds, we might be somebody else, isn't it? We might be behaving this way, but in our minds, we might be thinking that way, isn't it? So the primacy of the mind, the primacy of the thoughts is again emphasized by Baba Saheb Ambedkar. So if a man speaks or acts with an evil thought, pain follows him. If a man speaks or acts with a pure thought, happiness follows him. Therefore, pure thoughts are important. So the conclusion is very clear. Why do we need to have the purity of thinking? Why do we need to have the purity of mind, which is the ultimate goal of Buddhism? Because unless our minds are pure, unless our minds are stainless, unless our minds are undefiled, our speech, our behavior will be based on that. And based on our speech and our behavior, if it's evil, if it's impure or pure, based on that, the pain or happiness will follow. So this is straight away from the first 2 verses of Dhammapada, and they are very fairly clear. We can all understand that very easily. But the connotation here is that the point that Baba Ambedkar is trying to emphasize here is the purity of mind. And the purity of mind is not easy to be acquired. We need to be mindful. We need to be thoughtful. We need to be earnest. We need to be bold, which means that we have to strive hard. It is not easy to achieve the purity of mind. We have to work hard to achieve the purity of mind. You see, so this is verse number 1 and verse number 3. If we read it together, we begin to see the total implication of these 2 fundamental verses. The verse number 4 is actually summarizing the part of striving. Be not thoughtless. So many a times, if we look into our minds, we are thoughtless. Our minds are wandering here and there. Our minds are directionless. Our minds are unbridled. Our minds are uncontrolled. Our minds are, drawing us out of ourselves. So you see what the Buddha is saying here: be not thoughtless, isn't it? So in other words, pamad, the opposite of the word thoughtless is pamad. So apramad and pramad. So apamad has a very important connotation, and we will see some of the beautiful gathas that are going to come in the next subsections on apramad. But here, suffice is to know that pramad or laziness or the slothful states of mind are not what we are trying to perceive. We are supposed to be be not thoughtless. And it's not just about not being thoughtless. There is a gradation of striving which says that watch your thought, watch your mind, know your mind, understand your mind. And beautifully put, the third sentence, draw yourself out of the evil way, isn't it? So there, of course, we know that our minds are naturally inclined towards impurity. It's said that our minds are like the bees, or they always try to sit on the filth. Our minds are like monkeys. Our minds are not stationary. Our minds are not as we say, stable. They are unstable minds. We have unstable minds. So the implication here is very, very clear, and I think that's very beautifully put here in this particular verse number 4. Draw yourself out of the evil way. And the example, simile that is given here is very important, like an elephant sunk in mud. So if you have ever seen an elephant sunk in the mud, and the way the elephant strives hard to come out of that mud is the example which is given here by the Buddha. So drawing ourselves out of the evil way is not easy. It's not easy to come out of the muck. It is not easy to come out of the mud. It's difficult. And therefore, as it goes on in this verse number 4, draw yourself out of the evil way like an elephant sunk in mud. 4 sentences, but they summarize the path of the Buddha. Be not thoughtless. Watch your thoughts. That's not enough just to watch your thoughts. What we are supposed to do, draw ourselves out of the evil way. How? Like an elephant sunk in mud, by making efforts, by striving hard, by being bold, by being earnest, doing it here and now. The another implication of the word is doing here and now. The verse number 5 goes like this: let the wise man guard his thoughts, for they are difficult to perceive. So the thoughts are sometimes very coarse, sometimes the thoughts are very subtle, sometimes the thoughts are very difficult to perceive. Sometimes, all the times, our minds are very difficult to perceive. There is a paradox. How do we perceive something which is perceiving itself? How does the mind become mindful of itself? That's a paradox. And as this second sentence goes, let the wise man guard his thoughts, for they are difficult to perceive. Very artful. Our minds are very tactful. Our minds are not straightforward. Our minds are masters of deceiving it itself. The minds are like magicians. They create this entire magnificent world, the world of ideas, the world of views, the world of emotions, and you name it. And they rush wherever they list. So wherever they desire, they rush. Isn't it? This is the tendency of the mind. Wherever it finds the desire, it rushes towards it. And the implication of all this, why do we guard the thoughts? The thoughts are difficult to perceive, very artful. They rush whenever they list. Why do we do that? Because thoughts well guarded bring happiness. Thoughts well guarded bring happiness. How beautiful, how subtle, how clear the exposition of the Dhamma that has been presented to us by Baba Sahib Ambedkar. And why, we have to have this mind, which is reflecting mind. Now, this word reflecting mind, we can go and talk on talking a lot, because this word is a technical word, the mind that reflects. Because most of the times we are having this reactive mind. Our minds are always reacting. So reflecting means the mind that reflects back on itself. Now, this is very critical quality that human beings have, to reflect on their own minds, which the animals doesn't have. And this reflecting mind is the beginning of everything in the world that we see around, because of our ability to reflect back. Isn't it? There are various kinds of thinking. And if we are looking at in terms of thinking, the reflective thinking is the highest form of thinking, because this reflection enables us to think about what is going on in our mind. In other words, we can observe our stream of thoughts. We can observe the fantasies that are going on our minds, and all the time we are concluding about what we are thinking or what we are feeling, so that conclusion, whether it's right or wrong, can be understood by what is called the reflecting mind. So this combined use of the word, this with a metaphor of ill-thatched house and an unreflecting mind, is very well founded. And if you want, you can further look into what is a reflective mind, particularly the way John Dewey has explained. And reflecting mind itself is a mindful mind, because without mindfulness you cannot reflect back. You cannot think about your own mind. You cannot think about what's going on your mind, of the content of your mind. So the verse number 6 is very beautifully put, and so is the verse number 7, because they are like the contrasting verses, but they communicate a very important point about something that we all need to do. We have to cultivate this reflecting mind. Why do we cultivate the reflecting mind? Because the verse number 6 is very clear. As rain breaks through an ill-thatched house, passion will break through an unreflecting mind. See, if our minds are not reflecting back, if we are not guarding our minds, if we are not reflecting back on our minds, what happens to that mind? Passions will break through that mind. If our mind is not guarded, if our mind is not controlled, if our mind is not protected, if our mind is not reflected upon, then the passions will enter into that mind. Very beautifully put, isn't it? So you see the importance of the guarding of mind, and the mind which reflects back, the mindful mind, the vigilant mind, the bold mind, and the arising of passion. And whenever there is an arising of passion in the mind, we have seen that the suffering will follow. There will not be the purity of mind. So verse number 7 is a complete contrasting verse to the verse number 6, and it goes like this: as rain does not break through a well-thatched house, passion will not break through a well-reflecting mind. If the mind is well-reflecting, if a mind is trained to reflect, there will not be passion. This mind of mine went formerly wandering about as it liked, as it listed, as it pleased, but I shall now hold it in thoroughly, as the elder who holds the hook, holds the furious elephant. Isn't it? Here the mind is compared with an elephant, isn't it? Very difficult to control. It's a massive animal, and like the animal makes the efforts to come out of the muck, we similarly have to make efforts to come out of these impurities. Not enough that just like the mahout who tries to take the control of a furious elephant. You imagine a furious elephant. If you have seen the videos of the furious elephants, we know that the furious elephant causes such a destruction. Likewise, when our minds are furious, when our minds are uncontrolled, when our minds are full of passion, isn't it? If we let the mind wander aimlessly here and there as it liked, as it listed, as it pleased, then it's going to be a furious elephant. And a furious elephant is going to cause the havoc in the world, in the society, and so on and so forth. So you see the verse number 8, this mind of mine went formerly wandering about as it liked, as it listed, as it pleased, but I shall now hold it thoroughly, as the elder who holds the hook holds the furious elephant. Verse number 9, again beautifully put. It is good to tame the mind. It's very good to tame the mind. Chittang dantang sukhavaham. It's very, very, very good to tame the mind. Why? Because mind is very difficult to hold in tightly. Rushing wherever it lists. A tamed mind brings happiness. You see, so the taming of the mind, the purity of the mind goes hand in hand with the quality of a mind, the happiness and the pain that we have, that we experience, isn't it? So the verse number 9, very beautifully again presented. It is good to tame the mind. It's good to tame the mind, which is difficult to hold in and tightly. It's very difficult. We have seen it. Whenever we try to cultivate the awareness of our body and our minds, our feelings, and the reality itself, we find that it's not easy. It's not easy for us to sit even for some time with ourselves. We cannot be attentive to something for a longer time because the quality of attention is so sparse, is so wavering. We cannot be attentive for a longer time. And why is that? Because the mind is very difficult to hold on to, and we cannot hold it on tightly. It rushes wherever it lists. And therefore, what the Buddha says, a tamed mind brings happiness. Very clear, very thoroughly explained here. The verse number 10 goes like this: those who bridle their mind, which travels far, will be free from the bonds of temptations. You see, the bonds of temptation is Mara, the traditional evil, representation of the evil thoughts, evil deeds is a Mara in Buddhism. So if you want to defeat the Mara, what we have to do? We have to bridle the mind. We have to tame the mind. We have to control the mind. All these words are very important if we list them down. Bridle, control, tame, guard, then, being thoughtful, being vigilant, being earnest, being bold. They, in all different connotations, point out to the same thing. Isn't it? To be free from the bond of temptation. 11 verse is actually, we can read it, throughout our lives. If a man's faith is unsteady, now you will see what is the faith. And in Buddhism, there is a very tremendous importance given to faith, but this is not the faith which is based on any blind thing. It has to be backed by the evidences, backed by the experiences. So, for example, when we study the Buddha's Dhamma, we should have a faith because we have seen how useful it is for us. It brings the benefit here and now. Adi Kalyanam, Madhya Kalyanam, and beneficial in the end. Whenever you begin to study the Dhamma, whenever you begin to practice the Dhamma, when you begin to realize the Dhamma, in all the three, we begin to feel that, we are being benefited. So this experience gives rise to the further faith in the Buddha as a teacher, in his Dhamma as a teaching, and in the community of the people who are studying together or striving together, the Sangha. And therefore, the faith is very important. To have a faith in the Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha, not, of course, a blind faith. The Buddha is, of course, not going to come from heaven and going to solve all our problems. It's not going to happen. That we have the faith in the teacher in the sense that we know that if we follow this teacher, if we follow his path, if we strive together, when we strive together, it's very easy to realize something. And therefore, there is a great importance put on the Sangha. We are definitely going to strive hard to work on our minds, and by the striving hard, because of this inspiration, because of this faith that we have in the Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha, if that faith is steady, if that faith is stable, then we have a very fastest track towards what we call the freedom. So I was providing the context of the verse number 11. The verse number 11 is, of course, framed in a negative sense. If a man's faith is unsteady, if he does not know the true Dhamma, if his peace of mind is troubled, his knowledge will never be perfect. Isn't it? Perfection of knowledge. The prajna, if we want to have prajna, or if we want to have that insight, isn't it? It's very important to have the steady faith. It's very important to know the true Dhamma, isn't it? It's very important to calm our minds. It's very important to steady our minds. This is the path to perfection of our knowledge. And the verse number 12 and the verse number 13, they are also contrasting verses, but making the same point. What what is the point that verse number 12 and 13 are trying to make here, and we will look into that. Whatever a hater may do to a hater. There are a lot of people, who, as we have seen, there are these 8 worldly winds which are flowing all the time. Some people will hate us, some people will love us, some people will talk good about us, some people will talk bad about us. Sometimes we will gain, sometimes we will lose, sometimes we will have profit, sometimes we will have loss. That's how the world is, So these worldly winds are blowing all the time. So the verse number 12 is very deeply, clear about how we should be in the world. Whatever a hater may do to a hater, or an enemy to an enemy, a wrongly directed mind will do him greater mischief. You see, the responsibility about how do we do when something happens to us lies entirely on our shoulders, isn't it? The world might be full of worldly winds, but what we do about it is completely in our hands. There is a beautiful gatha in Mahamangal Sutta, Futassa Loka Dhamme Chintang Yassana Kampati, Asokam Virjam Kemam Etang Mangalamuttam. I have, this fond of this gatha so much, because he talks about, Futassa means touching, Loka Dhamma means 8 worldly winds, when they touch us. Futassa Loka Dhamme Chittang Yassana Kampati, whose mind is not, unsteady. It's not wavering. It's straight. And that person, Ashokam, means there is no sorrow. Ashokam Virjam, pure, stainless mind. Khemam, Shemam. Etang Mangal Muttam. You see, it's very beautifully put here. And this is what this particular Gatha is referring to in a different way. What he's saying is, nobody can do us the greater damage than our own minds. If our minds are wrongly directed, if our minds are not guarded, if our minds are not bridled, if our minds are not trained, if our minds are not protected, if we do not reflect, if we do not have the reflecting mind, then that mind, our own mind itself, is capable of greater mischief than a hater, than an enemy. This is very beautiful, very profound, very beautifully explained here by Baba Sahib Ambedkar, by bringing these very beautiful verses from the Buddha and his Dhamma. And you can see the brilliance of Baba Sahib Ambedkar here, the way he has structured every section neatly. He has selected every material so keenly, so that if we think about it enough, we have the ready-made, material in our hand for our own, freedom. So you see, this verse number 12, I'm going to read it again. Whatever a hater may do to a hater, or an enemy to an enemy, a wrongly directed mind will do him greater mischief. And the verse number 13 is, of course, the contrasting verse. Not a man, not a father, not a mother, not a father will do so much, nor any other relatives, as a well-directed mind will do us. We are looking at our friends, we are looking at our teachers, we are looking at our gurus, we are looking at the mother, the father, the relatives, to do good to us. And of course, they do good to us. We know that they do good to us. But what can do us much more good than all of this is the mind well directed. Is the mind well directed. See this verse number 6 and 7 and verse number 12 and 13. If we read them, reflect on them, these contrasting, images, you bring them together, we reflect, we think about it, and we begin to see that how beautifully that the path of the Buddha, the way of life in Buddhism is explained here. So before I end, I'm going to read it again, and then I'm going to open it up for the question, or any reflections or any thoughts from any of you. This subsection 8 on thoughtfulness and mindfulness. In everything be thoughtful, in everything be mindful, in all things be earnest and bold. This is the Buddhist way of life. All that we are is the result of what we have thought. It is founded on our thoughts. It is made up of your thoughts. If a man speaks or acts with an evil thought, pain follows him. If a man speaks or acts with a pure thought, happiness follows him. Therefore, pure thoughts are important. Be not thoughtless. Watch your thought. Draw yourself out of the evil way like an elephant sunk in mud. Let the wise man guard his thoughts, for they are difficult to perceive, very artful, and they rush whenever they list. Thoughts well guarded bring happiness. As rain breaks through an ill-thatched house, passion will break through an unreflecting mind. As rain does not break through a well-thatched house, passion will not break through a well-reflecting mind. This mind of mine went formerly wandering about as it liked, as it listed, as it pleased. But I shall now hold it in thoroughly, as the elder who holds the hook holds the furious elephant. It is good to tame the mind, which is difficult to hold in and tightly, rushing wherever it lists. A tamed mind brings happiness. Those who bridle their mind, which travels far, will be free from the bonds of temptation. If a man's faith is unsteady, if he does not know the true Dhamma, if his peace of mind is troubled, his knowledge will never be perfect. Whatever a hater may do to a hater, or an enemy to an enemy, a wrongly directed mind will do him greater mischief. Not a mother, not a father will do so much, nor any other relatives, as a well-directed mind will do to us. So you can see, how Baba Ambedkar is providing a lot of clarity on how we should live our lives as the Buddhist. And I think this particular subsection brings that point of responsibility, that we are responsible for our pleasure and pain, that our minds are not reflecting enough, our minds are not guarded enough, our minds are not controlled enough, our minds are not tamed enough. Our minds are doing whatever they want, whatever they please, whatever they list. We are completely at the mercies of all these ill thoughts that are going on in your mind. In other words, we have no control. So with this, I will pause my reflection, and I will open up the class for any comments from any of you. So anybody would like to comment? Anybody would like to say anything? Hello?
Hi, Rahul here.
Please.
Yeah, just wanted to share one thing, that this chapter what Baba Sahib has pushed here, that how it is related to the Buddha's main teachings. I mean, actually, this is the Buddha's main teaching, we all know. But
Yes.
as you said during the explanation, that our thoughts leads to the speech and actions.
Yes.
So Buddha's main teachings, if we look into the Ashtangik Marga, whatever he has given the first pravachan. So that's what is Ashtanga Marga is arranged. Now, first is the Samyak Sankalpa, which is related to thought. Then is uh, Samyak Vacha, and then is Samyak Karmanta.
Yes.
So that is how it is very related to very core teaching of the Buddha.
Yes. Yes, very true, Raul. It's very true. It's all, the Buddhism is all about training the mind. It's all about because the right view, we can have right view if we train the mind. If a mind is always trying to go back to the impurity, and I think that's a very important connection here. The purity of mind, the purity of thoughts, the purity of speech, the purity of action.
Yeah.
Isn't it? So what is the purity of mind? So purity of mind is a mind which is not passionate mind, which is not the mind which is going here and there as it likes it. Isn't it? In other words, we are not at the mercy of our evil mind. Isn't it? But that's not easy, because we are always at the mercy of our evil minds. And therefore the Buddha says that make efforts like an elephant does, which is sunk in the mud.
Yes, true.
Isn't it? So training of the mind is not an easy path. It's a very difficult path, as we can see from this particular subsection. It is not an easy path at all. It's the most difficult path. And Baba Ambedkar has said many a times that the Buddhism is the path of difficulties. It's not the easy path. But what is the outcome of this path? Nibbana, happiness, But it's up to us. It's our choice whether we want to live in the world suffering all the time, or if we want to live in Nibbana, or if we want to live in happiness, or if we want to live with freedom, or if we want to live with dignity, in harmony.
Very true. Yeah.
And that responsibility ultimately befalls on an individual, isn't it? Because we cannot control everything around us. And the worldly winds are going to blow all the time, isn't it? So how does your mind respond to something? It should be in our own hands. How do we take, this situation? How do we be in this situation? How do we reflect on the situation, on whatever is happening in our mind, instead of reacting to the situation, reflecting and reacting? Adding fear to the fire or removing fuel from the fire. What are we doing? It's very profound. This, as you said, Rahul, this is very profound subsection. The beauty of this subsection is this, that it should be our way of life. It is not something abstract. It is not daydreaming. It is not something that we just think in our minds. This is how we are supposed to live our minds, live our lives. A lot of people call their religion the way of life, but what is it? How they are supposed to live? If somebody asks us what is the Buddhist way of life, we should be able to tell that. To guard the mind, to protect the mind, to bridle the mind, to tame the mind, to reflect, to direct the mind towards good. Every single word in this particular subsection is so weighty and so beautifully arranged. Thank you, Rahul. Anybody else?
If our mind is full of passions like greed, hatred, anger, delusions,
Yes.
doubt, and indecision, laziness, then there is lack of understanding.
Yes.
There is confusion in mind.
Yes.
It is restless, anxious.
Yes.
So the thinking power is lost in that condition.
Very true.
And unless we train such a mind by some shield samadhi, then only there is understanding and prajna arises, and that is a cultivation of mind.
Good.
And pure thoughts come from such a mind, and that mind is ready to reflect, think, whatever. It is a strong mind through which the passions do not come then.
Very true. Very true. Very nicely put, Alkatai. Okay, if anybody has to reflect, we have another 5, 10 minutes, 9 minutes, or 8 minutes in our hands. Else we will end the class here. Yes, Shashank?
Jai Bhim, sir.
Jai Bhim, Shashank.
This is a beautiful section on thoughtfulness and mindfulness. And whenever I think of thoughts, and in general in science, human beings every day, they think like 60,000 to 70,000 thoughts every day.
Wow.
And most of the thoughts are so repetitive. And most of the thoughts, maybe I can say, are generally negative or generally full of stress, full of anxiety. But then whenever we read this chapter on thoughtfulness and mindfulness, it always gives us the path that how we can guard our thoughts, how we can put our thoughts in the right directions, and how we can make the thoughts more pure, more happy, so that pure thoughts will bring happiness. And if we guard our thoughts, will definitely leads to a highest happiness, that is nibbana. So I will say that most of the problem comes with the thought, because if we change the thought, definitely will change our whole perception and our whole life. For example, the verse number 6 is says that as rain breaks through an ill-thatched house, pasture will break through an unreflecting mind. So, for example, now there are like winter season going on, and people are suffering from headache, from cold and everything, and they're mostly depending on doctors and tablets and medicines everywhere. But people are not reflecting their mind. People are not watching their thoughts. It is because of the stress, it is because of the unreflecting mind, we are like getting caught up in this kind of diseases, and we are depending more on tablets and the medicines. But if we change the thoughts, we can heal ourselves, we can heal our any problem. And the brain and the body doesn't know the difference, what we vividly imagine and what we actually experience, because our thoughts are like, every time we always imagine. If it is past event or it is future event, we always imagine. And that reflection is always experienced in our body, in our brain every time. But if we imagine our good healthy body, our good healthy mind every time, whenever we caught up in a diseases or any problem, we surely definitely able to heal ourselves with our thought. And not only we can heal ourselves, we can heal our friend as well with our thought. And we can definitely guard their thoughts.
Yes.
So that we are like, more like a good kalyana mitra for them as well, to bring to come out of their own suffering, and then give them the good healthy life and good I can say good Buddhist way of life we can give them. So definitely we can say that we can more depend on our thought, we can more reflect on our thought, because Baba Sahib said that man's habit is generally habitual and unreflective. But because if we like keep on reflecting in our life, in our day-to-day life, will definitely bring a lot of good healthy life and a lot of happiness.
Very true, very true. Very good reflection, Shashank.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else?
Jai sir. Jai
Jai Rahul bhai.
When we know that we have to guard our mind and we have to tame our mind, but in daily life and daily chores, if we see something, if we found something and we got disturbed, and immediately we want to guard our mind, but in that fraction of second we got disturbed and we are going to do whatever we want, and that thing is happening. Then that thought we can reduce by doing meditation and sadhana, but in daily we cannot do. So that guarding mind is very difficult.
Yes.
In fraction of second it will go. If you see something good, if you see something bad, and your thought process will start and you got it. You over. The protecting mind and guarding mind is very difficult, and that we have to come out of this. What you will say?
Yes, you're right, because you see, that's why the perplexed situation, or the conflicting situation, or the contradictions are so important in Buddhism. And you see, that's why the Buddhism begins with reflecting on dukkha, isn't it? Because in most of the situation we find ourselves suffering, we find we feel pain, right? So that time our minds are they are not reflecting minds, because we don't know why do we suffer. And that's why the Buddhism begins with reflection on suffering, reflecting on this perplexity itself, as to why our minds are like this, isn't it? Why do we we lose our awareness? How do we stabilize our awareness? How do we, guard our minds? What are the methods? So we don't have to worry about this because we face this all the time, everywhere, in all the situations we face it, right?
Yes.
So
Correct.
the point.
After
Yes, Alga madam.
after 6 years of austerities and self-mortification failed, Gautama Bodhisattva thought himself that since it is the only mind's authority, that the body either acts or ceases to act, therefore to control the thought is befitting. Without thought, the body is like a dog. So it is ultimately the control of the mind and cultivation of the mind.
Good. So Rahul, you see where we are heading towards in this discussion is, this is going to happen with us all the time. In all the situations, we are going to be disturbed. In many situations, will not be the way we want it. And therefore, it's natural to, feel that our minds are very difficult to control. And as, Baba Sahib puts it here in the verse number 5, because, our thoughts are very difficult to perceive. Our minds are very artful. There is a very beautiful sutta which calls that our mind is like a magician. It conjures up the word that we want it to be, isn't it? So we always conjure up like a magician, something which is impermanent as permanent, something which has no inherent reality as having an inherent reality, Atma, something which is interdependent as, independent. So it's all our mind's game that we all the time are responding to. But if we change our minds, if we work our minds, if we transform our minds, if we make our minds, directed towards something good. So in the verse number 11, we were talking about this steady faith. So if we have a steady faith, for example, towards Baba Sahib and his mission, if we have a steady faith towards the Buddha, that means our minds are well directed, isn't it? If our minds are directed towards something good all the time, even if in whatever situations we are, if our minds are directed towards the welfare of the beings, like Baba Sahib Ambedkar, he has faced a number of difficulties, the worst difficulties that one can imagine, the worst kind of the life situations that one can imagine has been experienced by Baba Sahib Ambedkar. But you look at his life, his mind was always reflecting, his mind was always well directed, his mind was not rushing wherever it wanted, his mind was only rushing towards wherever he wanted, towards his highest goal in the life. Do you see, Rahul, what I'm trying to get it at here?
Correct, sir. Yeah, got it.
Isn't it? So we have to have this
Kushal path. You have to be in Kushal path always.
Kushal path, but where do we direct our minds? That's important. All the time, if your mind is directing on yourself, on me, mine, I. But even if your mind is directed towards, the world, responding to the suffering of the humanity.
True.
Isn't it? So this pains that we feel, their intensity becomes very less.
Yeah, it's very true. I want to say something.
Yes.
We always say that it is difficult to control the mind. Yes, it is difficult, but it is not impossible. So only thing that we have to show the proper direction, we have to use the proper methods. And if we follow the Buddha's teaching and proper path, I think it is not impossible to control our mind. We can definitely control our mind.
Beautiful. So we have gone beyond our time today, I think. And thank you so much, all of you, for joining this class. And you all have the link. So I think I don't have to give you the link all the time. So, if you have it, always you keep it, you save it somewhere so that you can use it. The link never changes. So that will be easy. And if any one of you wants to share it in the groups on Saturdays or Fridays, you're more than welcome to do. Thank you so much and see you in the next class.
Thank you, Jai Bhim.
Thank you very much.
Jai Bhim.